Right, then we can move on to setting up the rest of the lighting of the level, and I can talk about my workflow and how I organize the lights. So first of all, I always start with the biggest thing first. So when I start to light a scene, I always begin with the biggest thing, which is the sunlight usually. So the biggest source of light comes first, meaning the sunlight. Secondly, after that, the second biggest thing is usually the ambient light, or the counter sunlight, but something else in this direction. And both of these kind of share the same purpose. Both of them cast an ambient blue light. So that usually comes second. And third after that are the ordinary lights. So the most common type of light is the third thing I do. Meaning standard blue lights in this case, for example. And after that, the fourth thing I do is usually any unique light. So for example, the light that would come from the water, that would be the fourth thing I do. So it goes like that. I go from the biggest thing to the least common thing and the smallest thing. So I tend to take a very structured and organized approach to lighting out levels. I do that in general with the whole process. I always first build the geometry, then I make sure that all the textures and all the materials are correct, and then I move on to lighting. And when I do lighting, I go through it as said from the biggest thing to the smallest thing. I also make sure that when I do certain lights, I always do one type together all at once. So I would be lighting out all the blue lights in a level, for example, at once. Then I would be lighting all the orange lights out in the level, etc. So I really go per type and through the level and through the entire level at once. And that makes sure that I can keep up the speed and that I always have a very good base to work from. Because you can't really light out these lights if you don't have the sunlight in. One of the things that I do, again, I will show you that later on in the games I worked on, but I tend to place highlights, small light sources, lamps and all that, in the shadows. So I first need to know where the shadows from the sun are before I can place such kind of lights. So it's a very organized approach. Also, for example, for texturing, and I made a small little example level here. I mean, this is basic stuff. And it's not really, this video is not really about lighting theory as in how to make pretty lighting. But this is basic stuff. I mean, the color of the texture also affects the light. If you have very saturated colors, for example, a very red floor, and you make a blue light, it still isn't really going to be blue. So the colors and the materials in general, the textures and the materials in general, they also affect how the lighting looks. So before I light out anything, I always make sure that I have a solid and well-structured textured base. So I make sure that without lighting, the level still looks consistent and unified. And if I don't have that, I cannot move on to the next step. I cannot move on to lighting, and I will redo the texturing. So I go very structured through the entire process, and that allows me to keep up the speed. Okay, so then we can light out a couple of these lights. So the small blue lights are the most common ones. These and these. And these are 3 types. So I'm just going to start with one of those. Also, there's some small orange lights inside. Over there on the meshes, on the actual walls. And other than that, I think that's all the lights available here. These as well, but that's kind of the same as the one over there. We start with, we can start inside. We already have this light over here. I'm going to make sure I have the same color. So this is a dynamic light there. I'm going to make a static version out of that. Again, you can convert lights over here, but this crashed my level in the past. So I'm not going to use this again. I'm going to just make a new light. With the exact same color. Like so. If I have long lights like these, what I could do is use emissive on it, as shown earlier in the video. So what you could do is use emissive for static lighting, but again that slows down the rebuild time some. So what I usually tend to do in these kind of cases is just use a couple of lights next to each other. In this case 2 will do. Let's say brightness 2 or so and a bit smaller. It's hard to see now though, because the light from outside seems to come into the level. I have to rebuild it again. Let's rebuild first so we have a proper view on how it looks. Okay, so after a rebuild it looks like this. I always tend to have very bright light sources near the source of the light, near the lamp. I usually tend to bring down lighting, indirect lighting scale a bit on the most powerful light sources. Yeah, then it resets, of course, you see the sunlight coming in again. But this looked pretty okay. I think it had to be a little bit larger. So what I pretty much do is I set up a few of the lamps. I set up one instance of every type of lamp pretty much, rebuild, and if that's fine, I will just start to copy paste that around. So I think this looked pretty fine as it was already. I'm gonna guess the numbers here. Indirect 0.3, radius 160, and I got brightness 3. Now I will copy one of those lights and place them underneath one of these lamps over here. I don't tend to rely too much on bounced lighting, especially for a level like this. It's an unrealistic level. It doesn't try to be Mirror's Edge or anything. It's quite unrealistic, it's quite dramatic. So there is not going to be that much bounced lighting going on. I'm going to work pretty manual here. Meaning I will have one light source to light up the geometry immediately surrounding the lamp. I will have one light on the ground to simulate the light dropping down from there onto the ground right beneath it. And I will have one light in between to simulate the larger radius light. So this one tends to be very, very powerful, say 8. It usually has a low indirect lighting scale for me. The second one tends to be a weaker, more overall light. So it has indirect lighting scale 1. So it bounces around a lot because it's a more indirect, broader light that illuminates the scene around it. But it has a lower brightness, say 1. And it has a big radius, say 512 perhaps, or perhaps even 640. Again, you don't have to use power of 2, it's just my obsession with that. And then the third light is again usually quite a small radius, say 256, low indirect lighting scale, and quite bright, but not as bright as the one near the light itself, near the lamp itself. So that's how I usually tend to do things. And then another trick that I have, and that's something I would like to get back to later, but I'm just going to prepare it right now, is I add in small variations to the color of the light. So I just change one of these numbers by a tiny amount. You're not really going to see the difference, but this is for organization in the scene. Doesn't really matter which one you change, it's just a point that they have to be slightly different from each other. Okay, so that seems to work as well. That presumably works. Then let's copy one of these lights again and set up the light outside. These two over here. Since this has no shadow casting, I can place the light inside of it as well. Also, by the way, if the light icons are too big, they kind of obscure the scene, you can always scale them like this with the draw scale box at the bottom. So same here, I make sure it has a unique color. So 252 is a unique one I didn't have before. Again, it's a very bright one near the light source itself. Low indirect lighting scale. And like so. So I really automize the whole system, the whole approach almost. Pretty much just use the same rules all the time, the same kind of numbers, the same organization, and that allows me to mass produce my lighting. So I think this works for the powerful light nearby that illuminates the nearby geometry. And then I place a second light near it that's meant as a broad overall light. So again, lower brightness, slightly different color, indirect lighting scale 1. and a pretty large radius. What I would like to have is a small amount of darkness between this light and this light. If I do this, for example, it's still a bit bright here. I would like to see a bit of darkness right in between the two light sources, so we have some variation in the lighting. For example, like this. So it's more interesting. If it were to be like this, then it's all uniform, the same brightness. And stuff that's uniform is boring. You want some variation and some composition. So I'm gonna aim for a small amount of darkness between the two light sources here. I'll delete this one temporarily again. That seems to work. Then I'm gonna copy that again to one of these lights. I'm gonna stick to just one light here, not two, because there's not that much geometry surrounding it, so it'll be fine with just one. Perhaps you wanna change the fall of exponent here a bit, 4 or so. Therefore you can have a larger radius. That seems to work quite okay as well. Some orange lights here. Let's set those up. Adding a new light near those. I'm gonna set 0.5 as indirect lighting scale. I don't want too much bouncing from this light. I pretty much just want it to glow up, but that's about it. Small radius. So it just illuminates the local area here. It's not a powerful light source. Somewhat bright, say power brightness 2, and orangish. I just pressed G, by the way, to hide the icon, so I get a better view on how it really looks. That seems to work. Then let's take the one here at the back as well. It's kind of similar as those lights. It might work with just the same kind of lights. So what I pretty much just do again is I set up one instance of every type of lamp in a level. And then I will rebuild. And if it looks fine after that, then I can just copy paste the existing ones. So I pretty much just set up a couple of test cases through the level. Now I copy paste it because I want to see what happens if there's two of them. Again, I would like to have a small amount of darkness between the two light sources. So we get an interesting composition of bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, etc. Seems to work. And then actually we can do the water right away as well. What I tend to do with water is add some ambient lights right above it to simulate light bouncing off the surface of the water and illuminating the geometry nearby. So I tend to manually set that up with low brightness lights. Actually, one might work. Low radius as well, small radius. And then I copy paste quite a few of them so you can see the edges light up a bit. Not entirely realistic, it's a bit cartoony. But for a level in this style, I think it's gonna work quite fine. And then sometimes I also add one larger light in the middle with a bigger radius. Something like that. And then we rebuild and we see how it looks after a rebuild. And this is the result after the rebuild. I think it looks pretty okay. This one gets a bit bright, gets quite overbloomed here. I'm gonna tweak that in a moment. I think the orange light works just fine. Might be a little bit too large. I presume if I have two of them, the whole thing here becomes orange. And again, I would like to have a bit of darkness in between the two lights. So this one needs a bit of a smaller radius. I think this light works fine. This works quite okay as well. And the big light here might need a bit of a larger radius, because you can see over here it pretty much stays the same brightness through. There's not that much variation. I would like to have a bit more variation. I would like to have the geometry light up a bit more than this. So let's tweak those things, rebuild again, see if it's okay then, and then we can copy paste it around. So I'm going to increase the radius of this, so it's brighter surrounding the light source. Again, it invalidates the lightning, so you get all the sunlight leaking in. So at this point I pretty much just remember how it looked and go from there. Make this a bit larger, maybe two. This one had to be a bit quite okay, but smaller. 256. This one is too bright. Let's go for 4. And the water, I think, is fine. It's quite subtle anyway. And then we can rebuild again. Verifying again. The brightness of this light is fine now. That looks fine as well. Might still be a bit dark. A little bit too dark, I think, and the rest is fine. So pretty much just gonna tweak this light. I'm gonna make it larger. And then I will copy paste it around. And that's it. So now I know that all my lights are pretty much fine. So from here on, I simply copy paste it around. Scale down the brightness of this one because it was overblooming the rock, because it's in the sunlight here. So I scale down the brightness of that one. And this one I'm going to make a bit larger, so it fills up the room a bit more, the hallway. Also, there's another light here. So let's copy the orange light from there, so it's the same type of orange. I'm making it rather large so you can see a bit of orange glow coming through when you look at it from this side. So that's some more variation to the color scheme. Actually, let's try to increase the fall of exponent. So it doesn't become too, if with a fall of exponent of 2 the whole thing becomes orange, the whole roof. I want a bit more variation, a bit more of a bright center with the light fading out quicker. Seems to work. So all the lights have now been placed. Everything seems set. So let's try a final rebuild and see if it looks like what we have in mind. And after the final rebuild, it now looks like this. So it's pretty close to what I had in the original level. Everything seems fine. I did notice I forgot this light here. Didn't place a light in front of that. But other than that, nothing seems overly over-brightened. We have some small amounts of shadow in between things, like here. So here as well, we have some blue in between the two orange lights. Corridor looks pretty good as well. Nice and dramatic, kind of dark. So the lighting works. There might be a few small things we could tweak, but in general it works. You can look at how I normally organize my lights then. So what I did was to give a slightly different color to each light. Right, so each light I gave a slightly different color. Other than that, all the lights are the same, but it's a slight variation in color there. And I did that because it allows me to select all the lights with a matching color. If you shift click a property, so I'm now holding shift on the keyboard and I click light color, nothing happened over here. But if you now right click that light, select, it now showed up over here. Select by property with that color. And I can now select all the lights in my level with this color. So therefore I can say I want all the lights, all those kind of lights. I don't want them blue, I want them orange, for example. Or I want them brighter or darker, etc. The same here. You can also do this with the brightness. For example, brightness 8. I shift click that and then it shows up over here. I can now select all the lights in level with brightness 8. And since only those two lights near the big lamps have brightness 8, and actually one more somewhere. oh, this one as well, over here. I can now say I want all the lights with brightness 8, I want all of them brighter, I want all of them to be brightness 10. So this allows me to mass select lights of a certain type. And you can do this with any property you can find in here. And a lot of the properties around aren't actually used in most cases, so you can abuse them for this as well. For example, rotation rate, it's only used when it's set to rotating over here. If this is not set to rotating, rotation rate is not used. Therefore, I can now say, okay, I can select these two lights here and set them to roll 1. And I can select these two lights here and set them to roll 2, etc. And then I can say, okay, I want I shift click roll 2, and then right click, select everything with, well, it translated it here to Unreal units, but either way it results in the same thing. Now it selects those two lights. So you can abuse a wide range of properties to allow you to mass select lights of a certain type. Also, tag over here is very useful. Object tag. This was used in Unreal Engine 1 and 2. It's still around for Unreal Engine 3, but it doesn't really do anything anymore. So you can do with this whatever you want. You can call it small blue lights, like so. So you can pretty much name the lights you have. And then again, you could shift click the tag, and then you can select by name. Now it selects both of those as well. This is my unofficial way of doing it. I don't think anyone else does it like this. This is the way I organize lights in a scene, because it goes much faster and it goes kind of fluent. I like how I can easily select whatever I want. The more official way would be to use archetypes. We can do that as well. We can make a new light here. Let's have a clear example. I made a new light, and I'm going to make it very red and bright. Like so. And then we can turn this into an archetype. So an archetype is pretty much just an actor with saved properties. So you save the properties away to an archetype. And you can do that by making the light in the scene, or in any actor in that case. Create the actor how you want to have it, set the properties how you want the properties to be, then right click the light, and here it says create archetype. Place this in a package, or in this case I'm going to place it in the level itself. So if you take the name of the level itself, and my name here is lighting underscore start underscore video, that one, it will save it in the level itself. Like so. And then if you look at the content browser, in that package you get this. This is an archetype. And you can now drag this into the level. I'll delete the original light. This looks the same, it's just a standard light, but this is in reality an archetype. So if you duplicate this, I'm gonna place it on the other side as well. Like so, and then double click the archetype over here in the content browser. You get the properties from that archetype, which looks identical to the original ones, except here you can see it belongs to the archetype. And now change the brightness to 1. You can see both lights update. So what you could do is create a number of archetypes per light type. For example, this is a campfire archetype. And then you would make a package in your game that has a whole number of archetypes in there. For example, this one is for campfires, this is for car lights, the headlights. This is for a light inside an office, etc. So you create all these predefined types, and then whenever there is a campfire in one of the levels, you simply drag the light onto the campfire, and that's it. And if ever you have to tweak it, you can just tweak it over here through these properties, rather than having to go through every level that you have in the game and tweaking all the lights that belong to campfires manually one by one. So that's the more official way of doing it. So you could do that, or you can just work with the properties yourself, like I do. Just pick one of the properties and shift click them to select by that property. You can of course also use the standard layers tab here and select all the lights of a certain type and create a new layer. That's also a possibility. I rarely use this extensively because the whole layer system in Unreal is not very well built out. It's very simplistic. So over the years I've learned to just avoid it and work entirely with the properties as I've been doing here. There's also a third way of doing this, and that's by using streamed levels. So if for a moment I select a number of these lights, or in fact, let's just select all the lights, select all point light actors, go to the content browser here and then the levels tab. If you do not see the levels tab, it's probably in view browser windows levels. And then while you have these all the lights selected, level, new level from selected actors, ask you to save that. So I'm going to save it as a lighting streaming example. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but save it somewhere in the content folder. Then I will ask you how to stream it. In this case, I would do always loaded, since we're basically going to make a layer, not using the layers tab, but using the levels tab. So always loaded. And there you go. Now you get a second level in here. And if I hide that, I hide the lights. So the lights are now in their own level. If I hide the original level, the persistent level is the original level, I have a level that has nothing more than just light actors. Whereas the original level has everything else but the lights. This one aside. This is a way that would allow two people to work on the same level. So the level designer could work on the original level, this one, and the lighting artist could be placing his lights in this level. And then both of them are streamed together. Because these are actually two different levels. If you look in an Explorer, this is the level that it streams in, and this is the original level. So it actually is one level that gets streamed into the first level, into the parent level. So you could have one person working in this level, adding the lights in there, and those lights then get merged into this level via the streaming functionality. So that's also a way you can organize things and set things up. If you do it like that, always make sure that when you want to rebuild a level, you load in the persistent level, which in turn loads in the streaming sublevel, and then rebuild both of them at the same time, which you would do by pressing rebuild right now. That would stream both of them in its rebuild both at the same time. If you hide one of the two, then it will only rebuild the visible one.